The sun dipped low behind the jagged peaks of the desert, casting long shadows across the barren land. Mara stumbled over the rocky ground, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Her skirts were torn, her boots caked with dust, and her hands scraped and bleeding from grasping thorny shrubs for support. She had nowhere to go. Every town she tried offered cold stares or closed doors. The man she had once trusted, the one she had loved, had turned cruel, and now her past chased her relentlessly across the Wild West. Nightfall approached, bringing with it a chill that sank deep into her bones. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to keep the shivers at bay. The wind whispered through the canyon, carrying with it the faint scent of sage and smoke. Somewhere, hidden in the shadows, movement caught her eye, a figure stepping lightly across the rocks, silent yet purposeful. Mara froze, fear clawing at her chest. She had learned the hard way that strangers were rarely kind, especially in these lands where every step could lead to danger. "Who's there?" she called, her voice trembling, though loud enough to betray her panic. The figure halted, and from the shadows emerged a tall man, his features sharp yet calm, his eyes dark pools of quiet strength. He was an Apache warrior, clothed in earth-toned garments that blended with the desert. He did not raise a weapon or approach aggressively. Instead, he stopped a few paces away and simply observed her. Mara's heart raced. She had heard stories of Apache men fearsome, fierce, and untouchable. Yet there was something different in this man's gaze, something that spoke of patience rather than threat. "I won't harm you," he said softly, his voice carrying a melodic calm that cut through her panic. Mara blinked, unsure whether to trust him, yet the desperation in her own body urged her forward. Her legs wobbled beneath her, and before she could protest, he stepped closer, extending a hand, not in command, but in invitation. I don't have anywhere to go," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper, laden with exhaustion and despair. "Everyone turned away from me." The Apache warrior nodded slowly, as if he understood without needing more explanation. He gestured to a small cluster of rocks that formed a natural shelter, partially hidden from the wind. "Come," he said gently. "You can rest there tonight." Mara hesitated. The fear of betrayal warred with a yearning for safety. Yet something in the softness of his tone, the steadiness of his presence, melted the last of her resistance. She allowed herself to follow him, each step heavy with relief and caution. They reached the sheltered nook, where the wind was softer and the stars stretched endlessly above. He knelt and gathered some dry brush, kindling a small, controlled fire. The glow lit his face, revealing the lines of a life spent in harmony with the land, strength tempered with quiet kindness. Mara crouched nearby, her eyes flicking between the flames and him. She felt a strange sense of security, an unfamiliar comfort in the midst of the wilderness. He glanced at her, and for a moment, the desert seemed to fall away. "Stay with me," he whispered, not as a demand, but as a plea, as though the words themselves carried a promise of protection and understanding. Mara's heart fluttered with uncertainty, hope, and a touch of fear. Yet for the first time in days, perhaps weeks, she felt that she might belong somewhere, not just in a place, but with someone who could see her not as prey, not as a burden, but as a person in need of care. As the fire crackled and the desert night stretched around them, Mara realized that the road ahead was still uncertain, fraught with danger and challenges. But in the calm presence of the Apache warrior, she found a glimmer of something she had thought lost forever: safety, trust, and the faintest whisper of hope. Morning light crept over the horizon, painting the desert in soft golds and pinks. Mara awoke to the gentle warmth of the fire's remnants and the subtle hum of wind through the canyon. The Apache warrior was already awake, kneeling near a small stream that cut through the rocky terrain. He scooped water into his hands, drinking deeply, then splashed some onto Mara's face. She gasped, startled at first, but quickly shivered in the cold. "Fresh water. You should drink," he said, his voice calm, almost melodic. "You need strength," Mara nodded, her throat dry and parched. The small gesture of care, simple yet deliberate, stirred a confusing warmth in her chest. She realized she had spent so long fleeing, surviving alone, that kindness felt almost foreign. And yet, it was undeniable. Here was someone who did not demand anything from her except her presence. After their brief morning ritual, the warrior gestured for her to follow. They walked along a narrow path winding through the canyon, the desert awakening with the chirps of birds and rustling of small animals. Mara noticed his careful steps, the way he seemed to know every hidden crevice and loose stone. She struggled to keep pace, her muscles stiff from exhaustion, but he slowed, allowing her to match his rhythm without words. "Where are we going?" she asked finally, curiosity mixing with caution. He paused, scanning the horizon before answering. "To a place where you will be safe. For now, you must trust me." His eyes met hers briefly, the dark depth of them steady and unyielding, a stark contrast to her own uncertainty. Trust was something Mara had never offered freely, yet she found herself nodding, almost instinctively, her fear tempered by something she could not name. As the day progressed, Mara began to notice the subtle ways he provided for her. He led her to edible plants, showed her where the water ran deepest and coldest, and pointed out the signs of approaching storms. Each act was quiet, patient, and deliberate, teaching her to survive without overwhelming her. In the process, he shared fragments of his life too, the vastness of the land he had roamed, the loyalty to his people, the strength of his ancestors. Though words were few, the stories were conveyed through glances, gestures, and the rhythm of their shared steps. When night fell again, they camped near a small grove of juniper trees. The fire this time was larger, casting shadows that danced across their faces. Mara sat closer than she had the previous night, the bond between them growing with each shared glance, each quiet moment of mutual reliance. He looked at her again, his gaze soft but firm. "You could stay here," he said, echoing his words from the night before. "Not as a stranger, not as someone to fear, but because you are meant to be safe. Stay with me." Mara's chest tightened. The road behind her had been harsh, lonely, and full of betrayal. But here, in the quiet desert under the endless sky, she felt something unfamiliar yet powerful: belonging. Perhaps she could trust him. Perhaps she could begin to believe that someone could care for her, not because of what she had lost, but simply for who she was. The wind whispered through the canyon, carrying the faint scent of sage and earth, as Mara allowed herself to sit silently by the fire. And in that fragile, delicate moment, she realized that survival alone was no longer enough. With him, she might find something far rarer hope. The next morning, Mara woke to the distant rumble of hooves striking the rocky desert floor. Her heart leapt into her throat. She had hoped the wilderness would shield her, but the past she fled had not forgotten her. Bandits men from the town she had escaped were closing in, their anger and greed driving them forward. She turned to the Apache warrior, panic flickering in her eyes. He rose silently, already scanning the horizon with the precision of a man born to the land. "Stay behind me," he instructed, his voice low but firm. "Do not run. Do not call out. Trust me," Mara nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. The fear that had once dominated her life now shared space with an unfamiliar sense of confidence. She trusted him. Whatever threat lay ahead, she would not face it alone. The bandits came into view, kicking up dust in the rising sun, shouting orders and jeers. Mara's stomach twisted, but the warrior's presence beside her was steady, grounding. He moved like a shadow, positioning them behind a boulder that jutted out from the canyon wall. The men approached, unaware that their prey was not alone. "You will not take her," the Apache whispered, more to himself than to Mara, though she heard the conviction in his words as the bandits neared. He sprang into action, moving with lethal grace. Mara watched, astonished, as he disarmed one man with a precise strike, sending another sprawling across the dirt. He was calm, controlled, yet fierce, every motion deliberate, every decision instinctive. Mara felt a mixture of awe and relief. This man, who had offered her sanctuary only days ago, was now her protector against the dangers of her past. In the chaos, Mara instinctively found her own courage. She grabbed a loose branch and hurled it at a man who reached for her, surprising herself with the strength she didn't know she had. The Apache caught her gaze and nodded, a silent acknowledgement of her bravery. Together, they moved as a unit, the bond between them growing in the heat of danger. When the dust finally settled, the bandits had retreated, nursing bruises and broken pride. Mara sank to the ground, her legs trembling, but she smiled faintly at the warrior beside her. He extended a hand, helping her to her feet. "You were brave," he said softly, his dark eyes meeting hers. "And now you are safe. For tonight, at least, this place is ours." Mara's heart swelled, a mixture of gratitude and something deeper stirring within her. She realized that danger had a strange way of clarifying truth. The Apache had not only saved her life, but had also shown her that she could survive and even fight, alongside someone she trusted. That night, by the fire in their hidden canyon shelter, the silence between them was not empty. Mara felt the unspoken connection, the mutual respect and understanding that had blossomed through fear and shared struggle. He looked at her, and again whispered the words that had become both promise and anchor. "Stay with me." This time, Mara did not hesitate. She felt the weight of the past beginning to lift, replaced by the fragile but growing hope that perhaps, for the first time, she had found a place where she belonged, not just in the wilderness, but with someone who truly saw her. The desert night stretched on, the stars witnessing a quiet, unspoken bond. And Mara, finally, allowed herself to believe that she might not have nowhere to go after all. The dawn arrived with a pale, golden glow filtering through the rocky crevices of the canyon. Mara rubbed her eyes and looked around, the fire from last night reduced to glowing embers. The desert felt less threatening now, almost alive with quiet energy. Beside her, the Apache warrior moved with effortless grace, preparing for the day. He didn't rush, nor did he speak much. Yet every motion was filled with purpose, a rhythm Mara was slowly beginning to understand. "Today, you will learn," he said simply, his voice calm, carrying authority without harshness. Mara nodded, curious and eager, though still cautious. She had survived on her own for so long, but the thought of learning from someone so capable sparked a new sense of hope. He led her along a narrow trail, stopping at a small grove of desert plants. "These can sustain you," he explained, pointing to prickly pear, mesquite pods, and small roots. He demonstrated how to gather them carefully without damaging the plants. Mara followed, fumbling at first, but gradually her hands became steadier, more confident. The warrior's patient eyes never left her, silently correcting her mistakes, guiding her without pressure. Later, he showed her the tracks of animals in the sand coyote, deer, and rabbit, and taught her how to read them. Mara was astonished by his knowledge, the way he could see stories in the faintest impressions on the earth. She tried to mimic his movements, crouching low, scanning the ground, and even managing to spot a small rabbit trail he hadn't pointed out. A faint smile passed across his face, just enough for her to notice, and Mara felt a warm surge of pride. By midday, he led her to a shaded stream. They drank together, and he demonstrated how to purify water with simple methods. Mara felt a sense of normalcy she hadn't experienced in months. Simple tasks performed together, teaching her survival and trust simultaneously. The Apache's presence was no longer just protective. It was guiding, nurturing, and strangely comforting Dot as the sun began to dip. Painting the canyon walls in brilliant reds and oranges, he led her back to their hidden shelter. Mara paused, looking around the small enclave that had become her refuge. It was modest, unassuming, but to her, it felt like a palace built from safety and care. Sitting by the fire, he turned to her, his gaze steady. "You are learning," he said softly, "and in time you will know the land as I do." "You are strong, Mara. Stronger than you think?" She felt a lump rise in her throat. She had fled, stumbled, and survived alone. But this man, this quiet, steadfast presence, was showing her that strength could be shared, and that survival wasn't the same as living. The wind rustled through the juniper trees, carrying the faint scent of sage. Mara looked at him, heart swelling with gratitude and a growing sense of attachment. The words he had whispered the first night echoed in her mind. "Stay with me." This time she understood fully. Staying wasn't just about safety. It was about trust, connection, and the fragile hope of belonging. She whispered back, almost to herself, "I will stay." And as the stars blinked to life overhead, the desert seemed less vast, less lonely. With him, Mara began to feel the first true sense of home, a place built not from walls or fences, but from care, patience, and the quiet strength of two lives intertwining in the harsh, beautiful wilderness of the Wild West. The morning sun spilled over the canyon walls, filling the shelter with warmth. Mara sat cross-legged near the fire, her hands trembling slightly as she held a small bundle of roots she had gathered. The skills she had learned from the Apache warrior were becoming second nature, yet a shadow lingered over her heart, the memory of her past, of the men who had chased her, and the cruelty she had escaped. He appeared beside her silently, as he always did, moving with the effortless grace of someone completely at home in the desert. "You carry more than the desert's weight," he said softly, his voice gentle but firm. Mara looked up, startled by his perception. How could he know? "I can't forget," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "The things I ran from, they haunt me." He nodded, kneeling beside her. "Survival is not just the body," he said. "It is the spirit. You must heal here with time, patience, and trust." Trust. Mara had barely dared to offer it, yet here it was, the quiet, unshakable trust she felt in his presence. She realized that he had given her more than protection. He had given her a chance to rebuild herself, piece by fragile piece. They spent the day together as the warrior continued his lessons. He showed her how to set traps for small game, how to read the weather and the shifting patterns of clouds, and how to move silently across the rocky terrain. Mara absorbed it all, feeling her confidence grow. Each task completed under his guidance was a victory over the fear that had ruled her life for so long. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of fire and violet, Mara walked to the edge of the canyon and gazed at the horizon. The vast desert that had once terrified her now seemed full of possibility. She felt a stirring in her heart, a sense of hope she hadn't known she could feel. The Apache warrior appeared beside her, his presence steady, unwavering. He did not speak immediately, allowing her the space to gather her thoughts. Finally, he said, "You have come far, Mara, not just in distance, but within yourself. You are no longer the woman who ran, afraid and alone. You are stronger." She turned to him, emotions mingling fear, relief, gratitude, and something more complicated, something she had not yet named. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "I don't know what comes next, but I want to stay with you." He looked into her eyes, a quiet intensity in his gaze. "Then you will," he said softly, almost reverently. "Stay with me, and together we will face what comes. Here, you are not alone." That night, As the fire flickered and the stars shimmered above, Mara realized that her past no longer dictated her future. The men who had hunted her, the fear that had shadowed her steps, they were still out there, but she now had someone to face them with. Someone she trusted. Someone who had shown her that safety was not just a place, but a presence, a bond that could protect even the most fragile heart. And as she sat beside the Apache warrior, feeling the steady beat of his life alongside her own, Mara allowed herself to believe in a future she had never dared imagine, a future not defined by fear, but by trust, courage, and the quiet promise of belonging. For the first time in her life, she understood that home was not a town, a house, or even a person. It was a place where the heart could rest. And with him, she had found it. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of sage and desert blooms. Mara awoke to the distant sound of hoofbeats and shouting, an unmistakable echo of the danger she had tried to leave behind. Her heart leapt, but this time it was not panic that gripped her. Instead, it was determination. She had learned, under the Apache warrior's guidance, how to survive, and now she knew she would not face this threat alone. He appeared at her side almost silently, as if he had anticipated her waking. His gaze swept the horizon, sharp and alert. "They are close," he said, his tone calm but carrying the weight of authority. "But we are ready." Mara's stomach tightened, but she nodded. She had grown stronger, more confident, and even though fear still lingered, it no longer ruled her. She followed him to a vantage point atop a rocky outcrop, the canyon sprawling below them. The bandits from her past, men with anger in their eyes and greed in their hearts, were approaching in small groups, unaware of the trap that awaited them. The Apache warrior moved like a shadow, positioning them strategically. Mara watched him, all mingling with respect. Every gesture was precise, every decision calculated. He handed her a small bow and a handful of arrows, guiding her hands as he had taught her. "Focus," he said softly. "Trust your instincts and trust me." The bandits entered the canyon, their shouts echoing off the rock walls. Mara's pulse quickened, but she steadied her breath. She drew an arrow, aimed carefully, and released. It struck true, startling one of the men and buying them a moment of advantage. Side by side, they moved through the canyon, using every trick, every lesson, every skill the warrior had taught her. Mara realized that her fear had transformed into action, her terror into courage. Hours seemed to pass in moments. By late afternoon, the bandits were forced to retreat, nursing bruises and humiliation. Mara sank to the ground, exhausted but alive. The Apache warrior knelt beside her, his expression a mix of pride and quiet relief. "You have done well," he said. "Today, you did not just survive, you fought, and you fought beside me." Mara felt a surge of pride she had never known. For the first time, she realized she was not simply a victim fleeing from danger. She was a participant, a fighter, a woman capable of facing the threats that had once seemed insurmountable. And she had not faced them alone. As the sun dipped behind the canyon walls, painting the sky in fiery oranges and deep purples, the warrior turned to her. His dark eyes softened as he reached out, brushing a strand of dust-streaked hair from her face. "Stay with me," he whispered, the words carrying the weight of promise and protection. Mara nodded, her chest tight with emotion. "I will," she said firmly, a quiet resolve settling in her heart. She had fled, she had feared, and she had survived, but now she had found something she had never expected: courage, companionship, and the possibility of a future shared with someone she trusted. That night, beneath a blanket of stars, Mara allowed herself to rest completely. The desert no longer felt empty or threatening. With him, she had found not only safety, but a partner, a guide, and a quiet strength that mirrored her own. Together, they had faced danger and emerged stronger. their bond deepened by trials and survival. And as the wind whispered through the canyon, carrying the scent of earth and sage, Mara realized that her journey had brought her to more than safety. It had brought her to a place where her heart could finally rest, secure in the steadfast presence of the Apache warrior she had chosen to trust. The next morning, Mara awoke to the soft sounds of the desert stirring birds calling, wind rustling through the sparse junipers, and the faint trickle of water from a nearby stream. Today felt different. The Apache warrior had promised to teach her more than survival. He would show her the ways of his people, the rhythms of the land that had shaped him and his ancestors. He met her at the edge of the canyon, his dark eyes calm and steady. "Today you will learn our ways," he said, offering her a hand. Mara hesitated briefly, then took it, feeling the strength in his grip. She realized that she was no longer just a visitor in his world, she was becoming part of it. They moved through the desert, stopping at a hidden grove where herbs grew wild. He taught her which leaves could be used for healing, which roots held nourishment, and how the land itself could guide their lives. Mara listened, absorbed, and followed his movements. Each lesson deepened her understanding not only of the land, but of him. His patience, his attentiveness, and the quiet way he guided her filled her with awe and gratitude. Later, he took her to a small cliff overlooking the canyon below. "This land has rules," he said softly. "Every creature, every plant, every wind has meaning. You must learn to respect it, and it will protect you." Mara nodded, feeling the truth of his words seep into her. She realized that trust extended beyond him. It was a trust in life itself, in the balance of the world around her. As they prepared a small meal by the stream, he shared stories of his people, not just the dangers and struggles, but the celebrations, the bonds of family and tribe, the courage that had carried them across generations. Mara felt a longing she had never known, a desire not just to survive, but to belong. When night fell, they returned to their shelter. The fire crackled softly, and Mara found herself sitting closer to him than ever before. "I never imagined life could be like this," she admitted, her voice low. "I thought I would always be alone, always running." He studied her, his expression gentle. "You are not alone," he said. "And you are not running anymore. You are here, with me. You are learning, growing, and becoming stronger. That is what matters." Mara's heart thumped in her chest. For the first time, she felt a sense of home, not a building, not a town, but a place defined by trust, connection, and shared purpose. She realized that every fear she had carried, every night spent trembling, had led her here to a man who respected her, protected her, and believed in her strength. He leaned slightly closer, and for a moment the firelight danced across his face, highlighting the lines of experience and the quiet kindness in his eyes. "Stay with me," he whispered again, the words now carrying more than a promise of safety. They were an invitation, a declaration, a bond sealed through trials and shared understanding. Mara nodded, feeling the weight and beauty of those words settle deep within her. "I will," she whispered, her voice steady. In that moment, the desert no longer felt vast or empty. It felt alive, full of possibilities, and she knew she had found her place. As the stars blinked overhead and the wind rustled softly through the canyon, Mara allowed herself to close her eyes completely. She had faced danger, fled cruelty, and learned to survive, but now she was beginning to live. And living, she realized, was far richer when shared with someone who saw her for who she truly was. The morning sun cast a warm, golden glow over the canyon, and Mara awoke feeling a sense of calm she had never known. The desert no longer seemed empty or threatening. It felt like a living, breathing place that had slowly begun to accept her. And beside her, the Apache warrior stirred, his presence steady and reassuring. Over breakfast, he watched her with quiet attentiveness, noticing the small improvements in her confidence and skills. Mara felt a strange mixture of gratitude and something deeper, a pull toward him she had not expected. She had fled danger and cruelty all her life, yet here, in the wilderness, she felt seen, understood, and safe. He gestured toward a nearby ridge. "Come," he said softly. "There is something I want to show you," Mara followed, her curiosity piqued. As they climbed, the desert stretched endlessly beneath them, the canyons and valleys painted in shades of amber and rose. At the ridge's edge, he paused, allowing her to take in the view. "This land is beautiful," Mara said quietly, her voice almost lost in the vastness. "I never imagined a place like this." He glanced at her, his dark eyes meeting hers. "It is only as beautiful as you allow yourself to see it," he replied. His tone was gentle, yet carried a weight that made her heart skip. Mara looked away briefly, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the sundot. As the day passed, they worked side by side, foraging and setting small traps, teaching Mara the delicate balance of respect and survival. Every glance, every brush of hands seemed to carry an unspoken language. Mara felt herself drawn closer to him, not just for safety or guidance, but because she wanted to be near him. When evening fell, they returned to their shelter. The fire crackled, throwing shadows across their faces, and for a moment, silence enveloped them. Mara felt her pulse quicken, her thoughts tangled between caution and desire. He reached for her hand, brushing it gently with his fingertips. "Do you trust me?" he asked softly, his voice a whisper that matched the wind around them. "I do," she replied, her voice firm despite the fluttering in her chest. He smiled faintly, a small curve that spoke of quiet pride and something more tender. "Then stay with me," he said again, his words no longer just a promise of protection, they were an invitation to something deeper. Mara felt her heart swell, realizing that trust had grown into affection, and perhaps something even stronger. The night stretched on, filled with the crackle of the fire and the soft hum of the desert. Mara and the warriors sat close, sharing stories, laughter, and long silences that spoke louder than words. She felt a new sense of connection, a bond forged not just in survival, but in mutual respect and unspoken understanding. As she finally rested her head, she realized that the journey that had begun with fear and desperation had led her here, to trust, companionship, and the quiet beginnings of love. And under the endless canopy of stars, Mara allowed herself to believe that for the first time in her life, she had truly found a place where she belonged by his side in the heart of the wild, untamed desert. The desert morning was unusually still, the kind of silence that felt like it was holding its breath. Mara had grown accustomed to the rhythms of the land, the whisper of the wind through the canyons, the distant cry of hawks, but today the quiet felt heavy, almost ominous. She moved carefully beside the Apache warrior, following his lead as he scanned the horizon with sharp, unyielding eyes. "They are near," he said quietly, his voice barely a whisper over the dry breeze. Mara's pulse quickened, but unlike before, fear was tempered by determination. She had learned to trust him and herself. A group of riders appeared in the distance, kicking up dust and shouting as they searched the canyon. Mara recognized the threatening figuresmen from her past, relentless in their pursuit. Her heart clenched, but the warrior's presence beside her steadied her. "Stay close," he instructed, his tone calm yet commanding. They moved swiftly, weaving through the canyon's rocky terrain, the warrior's knowledge of the land giving them an advantage. He guided her to a narrow alcove hidden from view where they crouched behind jagged boulders. Mara's hands shook slightly, but he placed a firm hand over hers, grounding her. "Breathe," he whispered. "We face this together." The bandits' voices drew nearer, unaware of the trap. Mara felt a surge of courage as she realized she could rely on him and that he relied on her. When the men passed within range, the Apache warrior moved with precision, disarming and incapacitating two of the attackers before they could react. Mara, remembering his lessons, nocked an arrow and released it, striking one of the men and forcing the group to retreat in confusion. Once the danger passed, they sank to the ground, breathing heavily, hearts racing. Mara looked at him, awe and gratitude flooding her chest. "We did it," she whispered. He glanced at her, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "Yes," he said softly, "because we trust each other. You have grown strong, Mara, stronger than you know." The adrenaline slowly faded, replaced by a quiet intimacy. Mara felt his hand brush hers again, lingering just enough to send warmth through her. "Stay with me," he murmured, repeating the words that had become their promise and anchor. "I will," she replied firmly, her voice steady, filled with a newfound certainty. The fear that had once dominated her life had been replaced with courage, trust, and something far more profound. She realized that she no longer just survived, she lived, and she lived alongside someone who truly saw her. That night, under the vast expanse of stars, Mara sat close to him by the fire. The desert around them seemed less harsh, less unforgiving. With every shared glance, every quiet touch, their bond deepened. She understood more than ever. That home was not a place but a connection forged through trust, courage, and shared experience. And as the wind whispered through the canyon, carrying the faint scent of sage and earth, Mara allowed herself to fully embrace the life she had found, a life of safety, of belonging, and of a bond that had been tested by fire and had emerged stronger than ever. The sun rose slowly over the canyon, painting the desert in brilliant golds and warm ambers. Mara stood at the edge of the ridge, the wind tugging gently at her hair. For the first time in her life, she did not feel fear lurking behind every shadow. The past, the men who had chased her, the cruelty she had fled, felt distant, like a shadow that no longer held power over her. Beside her, the Apache warrior stood silently, his presence steady and comforting. He had been her protector, her teacher, her anchor in the vast, untamed wilderness. But now, their bond had grown into something far more profound. Trust had deepened into affection, and affection had blossomed into love. He turned to her, his dark eyes calm yet full of quiet intensity. "You have come far, Mara," he said softly. "Not just in distance, but in heart and spirit. You have faced fear, embraced strength, and learned the ways of this land. And through it all, you have not been alone." Mara's chest tightened, her lips curving into a small, grateful smile. I could not have done it without you," she whispered. "You saved me, taught me, and gave me a place to belong." He stepped closer, reaching out to gently brush a strand of hair from her face. "You belong not just here, but with me," he murmured. "Stay with me, not because you have nowhere to go, but because you choose to." Her heart swelled with emotion. All the running, all the fear, all the nights spent hiding and trembling had led her here to a life where she could finally trust, finally rest, and finally be loved. Mara nodded, her voice steady, carrying the weight of everything she had endured and everything she had found. "I choose to stay." The warrior smiled, a rare and genuine expression that softened the lines of his face. He took her hand, and together they stood at the ridge, looking out over the vast desert. The canyon below was no longer a place of threat or uncertainty. It was a sanctuary, a home, a symbol of everything they had survived and everything they had built together. As the sun climbed higher, the desert seemed to hum with life around them, the wind through the junipers, the distant cry of a hawk, the gentle trickle of the stream. Mara felt it all, felt the land and him and herself intertwining in a harmony she had never known before. She realized that home was not a building or a town or a possession. It was connection, trust, and the quiet certainty of being seen and protected by someone who truly cared. That night, Beneath the endless canopy of stars, Mara and the Apache warrior sat close by the fire. Words were few, unnecessary. Their hands intertwined, their presence a promise to each other and to the future they would face together. The desert no longer felt vast or lonely, it was alive, and they were alive within it, bound by trust, courage, and love. Mara leaned against him, her heart finally at peace. She had nowhere to run, no fear to shadow her steps, and no uncertainty to cloud her nights. She had found a home, a partner, and a life worth embracing. And as the fire crackled softly and the stars blinked overhead, she whispered, "I am home." He smiled, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "And you always will be," he replied, his voice carrying the quiet strength of a promise that would last a lifetime. In the heart of the Wild West, amidst the harsh beauty of the desert, Mara had finally found her place. And for the first time, she knew that safety, trust, and love were not just fleeting dreams, they were her reality.